numbers and throwing my belongings onto the driveway, my sister stood on the porch with a triumphant smile. 5 long years. They missed my medical school graduation, my residency matching, and my wedding. They ignored every single call and letter, completely brainwashed by a malicious lie my sister had crafted out of pure jealousy. But last month, the universe decided to bring our story full circle. My sister was rushed to the ER with a life-threatening ruptured appendix, bleeding out internally, and screaming in agony. Her panicked, tearful parents were begging anyone to save her. Until the doors swung open, the room went dead silent, and I walked in wearing my surgical scrubs. The look on my mother's face was pure horror, her hand gripping my dad's arm so hard it left bruises. My name is Chloe Vance, and I am 28 years old. For as long as I can remember, I wanted to be a surgeon. I spent my entire youth buried in textbooks, sacrificing weekends and social lives to earn my spot at a prestigious medical school. But while I was building a future, my younger sister, Maya, was building a resentment that would ultimately destroy our family. Maya was always the golden child, a master of manipulation who despised any moment the spotlight shifted away from her. When I got my acceptance letter, her jealousy turned pathological. She knew our parents had set aside a substantial college fund for my tuition. Driven by pure malice, Maya spent weeks meticulously creating a web of deception. She forged emails from the university administration, fabricated fake disciplinary records, and even altered financial statements to make it look like I had secretly dropped out of medical school weeks into my first semester. She convinced my parents that I was squandering their hard-earned money on a secret, wild lifestyle, completely betraying their trust. The day the trap sprung is burned into my memory. I walked into my parents' living room during a weekend visit, only to be met with cold fury. My belongings were already packed in trash bags on the driveway. When I tried to show them my actual online student portal, my father threw the forged documents in my face, refusing to listen to a single word. Maya stood right behind them, wearing a subtle, triumphant smile that chilled me to the bone. They called me a liar, a thief, and a failure. Without a second thought, they completely disowned me, changing their phone numbers the next day and erasing me from their lives based entirely on a masterpiece of a lie. Being discarded by the only family I had ever known was a soul-crushing blow, but I refused to let Maya's malice dictate my destiny. With no financial support and my bridge burned to ashes, I had to survive the grueling landscape of medical school entirely on my own. I took out massive federal student loans, signed up for every available grant, and worked exhausting night shifts at a local clinic just to afford cheap rent and basic groceries. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, but the burning desire to prove my innocence through my success kept me moving forward. During those 5 long, painful years, I never completely gave up hope that my parents would see the truth. When I made the dean's list, I sent them a letter. When I matched into a highly competitive surgical residency program, I mailed them an official invitation. And when I finally got married to an incredibly supportive partner who stood by me through the darkest nights, I sent a formal wedding invite to their old address. Every single time, the envelopes were returned to my mailbox unopened, stamped with a cold, robotic return to sender. The silence was deafening, but it forced me to grow. I poured all my grief and isolation into my hands, sharpening my skills until I became one of the most capable young trauma surgeons at a major metropolitan hospital. I built a beautiful, financially secure, and emotionally peaceful life completely independent of my biological family. I had finally found closure in the ashes of their abandonment, entirely unaware that fate was about to force them to look at the daughter they threw away. Before I tell you what happened when our eyes met in that trauma bay, I want to see how far our community reaches. Follow my story from so I can give you a shout out. It was a chaotic, freezing Friday night shift at the hospital when the trajectory of my life shifted forever. The emergency room was already at maximum capacity, buzzing with the frantic energy of flashing monitors and rushing staff. Suddenly, the overhead trauma alarm blared through the PA system, signaling an incoming red alert emergency. A paramedic team was rushing in a young female patient in severe abdominal distress, showing advanced signs of septic shock and internal bleeding. As the lead attending trauma surgeon on duty, I snapped on my sterile gloves, centered my breathing, and sprinted straight toward Trauma Bay 2 to save a stranger's life. The automatic doors to Trauma Bay 2 slid open with a sharp hiss, and I stepped into the organized chaos with absolute professional focus. My eyes immediately locked onto the gurney, scanning the patient's vital signs on the monitor before looking at her face. My breath caught sharply in my throat. It was Maya. She was twisting in agony, her face pale and drenched in sweat, completely unrecognizable from the arrogant girl who had stood on the porch 5 years ago. But the real shock came when I looked past the bed. Standing in the corner, looking frantic and helpless, were my parents. They were desperately hovering over Maya, pleading with the niches to do something, anything, to stop her pain. The room felt like it was spinning, but my surgeon's instinct kept my feet anchored to the floor. As I approached the bedside with my chart, the sudden silence in the room became heavy. My mother was the first to look up from Maya's writhing form. The moment her eyes met mine, every single ounce of color completely drained from her face. She froze mid-sentence, her jaw dropping in absolute, paralyzed disbelief. She didn't see a dropout or a thief. She saw the lead attending surgeon, the absolute authority in the room, wearing the hospital badge that bore my name. In her sheer horror and confusion, her hand clamped down onto my father's forearm. She gripped his arm so violently, her nails digging deep into his skin, that it visibly left deep red marks. My father gasped, turning to see what she was staring at, and stammers my name in a choked whisper, realizing the daughter they had ruthlessly discarded was now the only person standing between Maya and the grave. My father took a desperate step toward me, his hands trembling as he began to stammer an emotional explanation, but I stopped him instantly with a sharp, raised hand. The personal drama, the 5 years of agonizing silence, and the burning pain of their betrayal had to be locked away in a dark corner of my mind. In this room, I wasn't the daughter they had discarded. I was the lead attending surgeon, and a human life was hanging in the balance. I completely shut down their frantic attempts to apologize, maintaining an icy, flawless professional boundary that left no room for family discussion. Turning my full attention back to the monitors, I quickly reviewed Maya's emergency ultrasound and CT scans. The diagnosis was terrifyingly clear. Her appendix had violently ruptured hours ago, causing widespread acute peritonitis and severe internal bleeding that was rapidly pushing her body into catastrophic septic shock. Maya was drifting rapidly in and out of consciousness, her eyes rolling back as she whimpered in sheer agony, completely powerless and realizing that the sister she had systematically tried to destroy was now her absolute and only hope of survival. I turned to my parents, my voice deadpan and clinical as I explained the high-stakes reality of the emergency. If we didn't get her into the operating room within the next 10 minutes to wash out the toxic infection and control the hemorrhage, she wouldn't survive the night. My mother was sobbing uncontrollably, her face twisted with a mixture of terror for Maya and crushing guilt toward me. With shaking, completely humbled hands, both of my parents signed the surgical consent forms I presented. Without another word, I grabbed the gurney and wheeled my sister straight into the operating room. Inside the operating room, the heavy silence of the hospital vanished, replaced by the rhythmic, clinical beep of the heart monitor and the steady hum of the anesthesia machine. For the next 2 grueling hours, my personal feelings ceased to exist. I was entirely focused on the intricate, high-stakes task at hand. Maya's abdomen was filled with toxic fluid from the ruptured appendix, and the infection was dangerously close to shutting down her vital organs. With precise, steady cuts, I worked alongside my surgical team to control the internal bleeding, thoroughly flush out the deadly sepsis, and repair the damage. It was a difficult, high-pressure procedure, but my years of intense, independent training paid off flawlessly. We stabilized her heart rate, closed the incisions, and saved her life. Once Maya was safely transferred to the post-op recovery unit, I walked out into the private waiting room where my parents were pacing the floor in absolute agony. The moment I entered, they rushed toward me, tears streaming down their faces as they begged for news. "She's stable, and she's going to make a full recovery," I said, my voice completely calm and devoid of emotion. They let out a collective sob of relief, and my mother reached out to hug me, but I stepped back, maintaining a cold, unyielding distance. Instead of shouting or releasing years of built-up anger, I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. I calmly laid the contents across the table. My official medical school diploma, my current employment contract as an attending surgeon, and a stack of the old, unopened letters they had marked, "Return to sender." The physical truth completely broke them. As they stared at the official documents, the realization hit them like a physical blow. Maya's 5-year-old lie was entirely exposed, and they had destroyed their relationship with their eldest daughter for absolutely nothing. Maya recovered steadily over the next week, but the hospital room she woke up in was completely devoid of the warmth she used to manipulate. With her lies fully exposed by my medical records, my parents finally confronted her about the malicious web of deception she had spun 5 years ago. The golden child facade was permanently shattered, leaving her to face the heavy reality of her own toxic choices. My parents spent days desperately calling my phone, leaving tearful voicemails begging for forgiveness and asking to be part of my life again. But the damage had already been done. I chose my own peace over their guilt. I politely but firmly informed them that while I fulfilled my duty as a physician to save a life, I had no obligation to welcome back the people who had so easily discarded me without a second thought. I walked away from their drama with my head held high, returning to the beautiful life and loving husband I had built entirely on my own. Surviving their abandonment taught me that your value isn't defined by the people who fail to appreciate you. If you were in my shoes, would you ever let them back into your life? Or would you walk away? I'm leaving 2 more unbelievable family revenge stories on the screen right now that will completely shock you. Thank you.